Hello, I'm Jason Kachuk. I currently work for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Alpena Fish and Wildlife Conservation Office, and my project is finding a surrogate species for individual invasive species to aid in sampling programs. A lot of this will be done mainly for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, seeing as I work for them, but I'm also going to work alongside some partners to potentially enhance their sampling. They are the U.S. Geological Survey, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and the Michigan DNR. We do a lot of work with these agencies, and we bounce ideas off of them pretty frequently. So it just seems right to potentially aid them in some of their sampling efforts and give them a little bit more to go on with helping out sampling. So some background for this project is obviously it's invasive species which are critical to the ecosystem. They do a lot of damage. Depending on the species, it's always different. Comparing our Great Lakes region, you have 180 aquatic invasive species, and that's everything from plankton, different water plants, fish, crayfish, mussels, and then you compare it to like Greece, who has 270 as of 2007. I mean that's pretty high numbers for different locations, and a lot of it depends on stocking and shipping, bait dumping. There's a lot of ways invasive species can get introduced. In the Great Lakes, we have some well-known ones such as the zebra mussel, the round goby, and the sea lamprey. Round goby is very big in the Detroit River, Lake St. Clair, and the western basin of Lake Erie. That's just a main focal point. They were first found in Lake St. Clair in the 80s. Zebra mussels have been found everywhere in the Great Lakes. I know they did a lot of damage to Lake Michigan. Their filter feeders, they take away food from a lot of other species. And then we had some other species who got in through a different way, which is the Welland Canal, which was built to go around Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls was a good natural barrier, kept a lot of species out from the Atlantic, but then you had white perch, white bass, and the sea lamprey all got in that way. And that was a kind of a blunder on our part, but it's a lot of ways we find out these things is after the fact. So potential invaders I'm going to use for my project are based off of a watch list from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. They have created a watch list for all potential invaders, and it usually just encompasses all of the Great Lakes. Every year there's an update to each specific body of water with the top 5 biggest concerned species that could make their way in. And as I mentioned before, that could be from ballast water, stocking, dumping, a lot of ways these fish can get in. Just as an example of an invasive species that is on the watch list is the blue catfish. They were stocked in Chesapeake Bay. It's a non-native area for them. They're usually in the southeast. They get really big and are voracious eaters. Well, they have caused a decline in native white catfish populations, which was due to the overfeeding, and they're also able to eat a white catfish if they so choose. Another species that is kind of a concern on a worldwide scale right now is the marble crayfish. They are a whole new type of species. They were potentially created in a lab. No one truly knows the origin of it. Some of it's based off of a native Great Lakes crayfish, actually. They have no habitat preference, and they breed asexually. They actually create genetic clones of themselves. There's only females in this species, so that's a species that we are on the look for. A very, very big concern species right there. So my main study area for this project will be Lake Erie waterways. Lake Erie is St. Clair all the way down to the eastern end by Buffalo. That's the what encompasses Lake Erie waterways. Most people, at least in Michigan, don't consider St. Clair, Detroit River, Lake Erie, but they are due to the way the basin is. So the Nature Conservancy, led by Lindsay Chatterton, created high-risk areas, a vector analysis study, which is still in the works being published. Luckily I've had the chance to talk to him and work alongside him a little bit, we get a lot of information from him on these areas. So to break Lake Erie into smaller chunks, I'm focusing on some of those high risk vector areas for this study area, and that will be Sandusky Bay, which is south central. Also Marblehead area is kind of lumped into Sandusky Bay, so that's kind of going to be a focus. Maumee Bay, which is the western end, it's becoming a very big high area of traffic. Waterways are jam-packed with barges, a lot of shipping traffic. And then there's Lorraine, which is west of Cleveland. That's another focus point that's to be sampled. There's near the area is the Black River, so a lot of these areas will have a river of some type going into them. And then obviously the Detroit River, that's kind of home base for me, so it's kind of good to give back to that area. And there's also a lot of fishermen, barge traffic, just general population's pretty high, so that's why that is on the list. So my goals for this are to have a surrogate native species for the invasive species, create hotspots using ArcMap for specific species, and then I want to be able to recommend gear types for the environment and species. Gear type is going to be important. In the end, I want to do like new protocols. Water in Lake Erie and Lake Huron are up about 3-4 feet this year, so that is a concern, and it also changes the way sampling can be done. An example I have for that is the Super Seine in the picture on the bottom left. That is designed by the Alpena Fish and Wildlife Conservation Office. It's great. It's 8 feet tall, so you can use that over, say, a pike net in certain areas, because pike nets can only be in water that's up to 6 feet. So this helps when waters change their depth. So that's just an idea of some of the little changes to make in the future. So examples of surrogate species would be the yellow perch, and then the European perch is your invasive species. They look really similar. European perch actually is a bigger species than the yellow perch. The only risk for the European perch, if it made its way into the Great Lakes, would be hybridization of yellow perch, which is a very popular game fish. So using the mentality that they're going to stay in the same type of water, breed similar capacities, that's how I would link this based on literature review to be a surrogate species for the invasive. Since it's a potential invader, we're able to sample areas for yellow perch to look for European perch. Another example of that would be the channel catfish and blue catfish, and this example stands out based on the reproductive cycles for both species. They're very similar. They also like similar type of habitat. Blue catfish is a southeastern species. The channel catfish has a pretty good distribution across the country. So if we base it off of, like, example of an area would be like Saginaw Bay up in Lake Huron. There's a nice shipping channel down there, and if you run a couple trawls through there, you pull up 1,000, 2,000 channel catfish every trawl. It's just a perfect spot for them. They do really well there. But while if you want to focus on blue catfish in that area, if it makes it to top 5 list for Lake Huron, you could sample for them specifically based on where you're catching channel catfish. Using this mentality will save a lot of time for people in the future of throwing random gear out trying to hope for an invasive species to come in. So the methods for this, I'm going to identify surrogate species for an invasive based on literature reviews. So between literature and then obviously going through data that we currently have, we can find a good link. Some species have already been taken over other areas in the world. Common carp is one of them. So if we mapped out, like, an example of where common carp were at, we kept catching them and we linked them to another species, we can target that species for common carp. Just going along those lines, and hopefully it all works out. Hotspot analysis of potential invasive species locations based on that surrogate again. So that's going to be using ArcMap. ArcMap is definitely a key component of this program. I'll probably use ArcGIS Pro as well as soon as I get a little bit better at it. There's a lot of great tools in there, especially for hotspot analysis. Kernel density is another one that can kind of fall into the hotspot analysis category, and I'll probably use that as well. And then methods for a new sampling plan based on the hotspot locations after they're analyzed in ArcMap. And I want to write up a new sampling protocol. Based off of our old sampling protocol, there's always going to be changes. You can't keep doing the same thing, expecting different results. So that's kind of why I want to write up a new protocol, and that protocol will encompass, how many nets do we set in of each gear type in this location. Obviously that can be fluid and change depending on demand, but as long as you have that basis and you meet that minimum goal, we'll be successful. So expected results would be to change sampling programs from multiple agencies. If we can all get on the same page and target these invasive species, we will be much better off, and we'll be able to protect the Great Lakes, have a good early detection program. Also, better understanding of invasive species locations. We do not know a lot about them. A random species can come across someone's desk, like the Chinese mitten crab, and nobody has a clue on how to sample for them, what they look like, anything about it. So then all of a sudden you have to do a bunch of literature review and try to get understanding. Well, if somebody in an agency has an idea of a hotspot for this species, then we can share it with each other and have a better sampling program. And then hotspot maps of potential locations for invasive species. This is very key, as we are in charge of finding them early before they become established. If an invasive species comes in and is established, then we'll have to make strike teams and other stuff to try to eradicate that species. So if we have these results and all of a sudden we're finding a new species and they become established, we also have more ammunition for strike teams. There's a lot of work in this area with grass carp right now, and you have all these agencies working together to try to understand more about the species. Something like that, it's really great when everyone works together, and we hope that in the future it can continue like this and go smooth and obviously protect the Great Lakes.